Hey everybody, so now I'm going to go to the introduction uh, of Yong's book, page 1, and says he's going to talk about 3 different theologians. Macrina from the 4th century, a sister of a couple of very famous theologians, men, both of whom acknowledged that Macrina was their main theological mentor and teacher, and also spiritual example. Her brothers' names are Basil of Caesarea and Gregory of Nyssa. The towns that are associated with their names, they're different towns, obviously, because those are the cities where each of them served as a bishop, sort of in the area. Then it was called Cappadocia. I think now that would be part of Turkey. That's in Turkey, I think roughly to the west of the Black Sea, somewhere, kind of up. That's about all I know about it. But and then John Wesley as well. Near the about 8 lines from the bottom of page 1, Yong says, we will define a theologian as someone who thinks about and considers God and all things in relationship to God. That should sound familiar. You know that I've given you a definition of theology as a disciplined discourse about God and about everything else in the light of God. And then we went on to talk more specifically about Christian theology as disciplined discourse about God as revealed in Jesus Christ, and about everything else in the light of that God, that is, God is revealed in Christ, for Christian theology. You know, I just going to highlight a couple things. I think that what she has to say, or he has to say about Macrina, I think he's kind of wrong on something really important. Bottom of 2, about 8 lines from the bottom, Amos, my friend, says, while on her deathbed, that is Macrina, her brother Gregory recorded what he presents as an extended conversation with his sister, which he then published as On the Soul and Resurrection. He then says, these dialogues seem to be fashioned after both philosophical and theological predecessors. Quite true. I think that I'm going to, rather than say what I'm going to go up to the next page. And here's where I think that, he missed the boat. So right above the little block quotation in the box, Macrina put theological reflection and teaching in service of Christian life, which certainly is true, and hopefully most Christian theology does that. But above that, about 8 lines above that, Gregory, little brother, Gregory they've lost their older brother Basil, and he seeks comfort from his sister and teacher, as he calls her, and he does. By the way, she apparently was herself on her own deathbed when her little brother Gregory comes to her for theological and pastoral counsel and encouragement. He presents his doubts, Yong writes, about the persistence of the soul upon the death of the body. He's apprehensive about death and worries about the impossibility or improbability of the resurrection of the body and the soul's post-mortem, which means, of course, after death, fate. On each point, Macrina presents counter-conclusions, often buttressed and undergirded by Scripture. She explicates the nature of the soul, gives reasons for its endurance in Hades through bodily death, and anticipates the body's eventual resurrection, here in contrast to the Platonic dialogues, since Plato and his teacher Socrates both were interested only in the immortality of the soul and had no interest in a body a bodily post-existence that's quite central to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. All three traditions, at least in their orthodox expressions, expressing hope for the resurrection of the body. Now, here's where I'm going to try to do this quickly, but it's kind of important to know this about Macrina. In her time, 4th century, it was quite typical for most Christians, and certainly Christian theologians as well, to be deeply influenced by Plato, and whether they knew it or not. It was sort of like it was the water they were swimming in if they were fish. This was just the philosophical, cultural worldview, and that worldview was that upon the death of the body, the soul continues to exist, and not only that, actually leaves the body. And for many Christians, even as today, there would be the assumption that then the soul goes either to heaven or to punishment in hell. Now, Christians also believed in the resurrection of the body, and that's where things got a little fuzzy for a lot of folks. Like, how in the world, what does it mean to believe both in the immortality of the soul, but then also have a hope for the resurrection of the body? And in fact, I think for many, the question of the resurrection of the body became, secondary, perhaps on the back burner, because again, their Greek culture was so thoroughly immersed in the idea of the soul's survival after the body's death, and that being the really important thing. At its most extreme, and this is the most extreme, we had a teacher in the late 2nd century, late 2nd century, by the name of Origen of Alexandria. The Origen is spelled O-R-I-G-E-N, who believed that the soul not only survives bodily death, but that the soul and all souls are on a very long journey, and basically they believed in reincarnation, that the soul would move from one body to the next, and hopefully on an upward climb. And in fact, he did believe that eventually all souls, though it may take many reincarnations through many levels of being beyond planet Earth, I think he did look out at the night sky and assume that, some of those stars and so on up there represented worlds where souls who were farther ahead on the journey were already there, and they're moving upward back toward God. Origen actually believed that souls may take many bodies to get there in many different worlds, but he did think that all souls eventually would be gathered by God into eternal salvation. That included, by the way, the soul that we call Satan. And so Origen was not only what we call a universalist, he was a pretty extreme universalist, since for him this universal salvation would include even Satan himself. That didn't win him many points with a lot of people. He eventually was condemned as a heretic. I mean, he's a very brilliant man, overly determined by Platonic philosophy. But the point here being that he saw the body simply, like the body that you and I are right now, as just one stepping stone among many physical existences for our soul. So it was probably not even primarily his universalism so much as it was his teaching about reincarnation, that souls sort of get recycled through many bodily expressions and bodily levels, or even then eventually spiritual levels, on their way back to God. Now, Macrina and her brothers knew Origen's teaching. They had a lot of respect for Origen. I won't go into why particularly right now, but they also disagreed vehemently with his idea about souls on this reincarnational journey. But Even if Origen was extreme, most Christians, including the Cappadocians, generally did teach that the soul, upon the death of the body, the soul would then move into some different state, right? Some post-mortem state. This is what makes Macrina so interesting. In her dialogue with her brother, and this is something that Amos doesn't talk about, I at least have never seen her talk about the soul going to Hades. What she actually says is that when the body dies, the soul doesn't go anywhere. The soul doesn't leave the body. The soul actually, and she knew that what happens to bodies is they begin to decompose, right? And in her language, the atoms begin to stream back out into the universe. That's her language, which was pretty, cosmic and pretty correct. So she had this interesting idea that rather than leaving the physical realm of bodily existence, like my soul, when I die, will actually sort of follow all of my molecules in all the various directions they might go and into whatever bodies they go, and kind of keep track of them. The soul's job, if you will, is just to keep track of these, atoms or molecules, however, wherever they might go. Surely she realized that many of them get recycled into other bodies. We are, after all, worm food at some point, and worms are bird food, and birds are somebody's food. And so, and even aside from that, our atoms do become redistributed. Nonetheless, she had this really fascinating idea that the soul just keeps track of wherever those atoms go, no matter how far dispersed they get. And so that on the day of the resurrection, whenever that occurs, when the trumpet sounds, the soul has the job of basically drawing all those atoms back, like in this act of the resurrection of the body. Now, it's God who raises the body, but the soul, basically what she's doing is she's keeping the belief in the soul, rejecting the idea that the soul goes off to some other realm, because actually she's really challenging the strong dualism of body and soul. To say that what the soul does is actually track physical molecules, no matter where they stream to, and that's what the soul does until the body is resurrected, at which point soul and body are, in a sense, reunited. This was a very interesting idea. I've yet to find out whether there was anybody that we know of that gave a precedent to this. I love to think it was Macrina herself in her genius, because the genius is she's not buying into the radical dualism of body and soul that the Greek tradition generally assumed, that also led to a rather flippant attitude toward the body, if not just pure despising of the body. So she's giving the soul a different role. Amos Yong doesn't mention this. And to me, this is actually one of the more significant moments in the history of Christian thought, because she's here's a woman theologian when women weren't generally considered theologians, a woman theologian honored by her own brothers as their number one teacher and mentor, who is putting the brakes on the kind of extreme dualism between body and soul that led to all kinds of unhealthy dualisms about physical body. A lot of this was then translated into male-female kinds of dichotomies, men being the spiritual and women being the bodies that are problematic. We can talk about that more some other time. But Macrina does a really great job, and I think is very significant in her resistance to that dualism. Reading my friend Amos's chapter, it sounds like she just reinforced that dualism. If you don't understand everything I've said in this, we'll get together Friday. You can ask questions.